Hello again, and welcome. I'm your host, Michael Peregrine. Today's topic brings us back to the bread and butter of the board and many of its committees, monitoring the impact of key economic trends and indicators. There's been so much going on of late with disruption, technology, and consolidation, the boards can be somewhat excused for focusing their attention in other directions. But the latest headlines are bringing the board back to some of the basics. Just what's up with the economy? What does jobs data tell us? Are we looking at new trends in terms of CEO tenure? And just how long will these favorable indicators continue? All critical governance issues, especially for the finance, human resources, executive compensation, and succession planning committees. And who better to explain these developments than my friend John Challenger, the highly regarded CEO of Challenger Gray & Christmas, the prominent executive outplacement firm. You've seen John on the Today Show, you've heard him on NPR, you've read his quotes. John is one of the most prominent national thought leaders today on the economy and the workforce. But before we turn to John, let's pause to revisit a theme we've discussed from time to time on the podcast, and which you have no doubt discussed in the boardroom. And that's the increasing prevalence of conflicts of interest controversies in the nonprofit healthcare sector. There are a number of issues related to these controversies, including those involving director as vendor relationships, co-investment arrangements, and the timing and scope of conflicts disclosure. But the underlying theme involves two key concerns: the adequacy of the board's conflicts policies in the context of an evolving and transformative industry, and the awareness of officers and directors to the full breadth of their duty of loyalty. These are concerns that certainly can be addressed by the board. There's no barrier preventing it. But as the media coverage suggests, there's a lot of incentive for the board to do so. Now let's turn to John and his thoughts on jobs, executive succession, and the economy. All right, John, how low can the unemployment rate really go?
Interestingly, I didn't think it could go this low. It's down to 3.6%. Didn't get that low in the last expansion, but there are unique factors going on right now. This global expansion, increased productivity, all of the technology that's transforming the workplace that just seem to be changing the dynamic at this time.
So are we seeing some new rules being written here?
Certainly possible. One of the issues is that labor force participation has stayed low. That's in many ways is shocking because with this low an unemployment, even with wages now starting to go up, it should be drawing more people back into the marketplace, but it's not. Even people of prime working age, the labor force participation is not at a peak. So there's seemingly room to grow, and employers are able generally to keep on making productivity gains, getting more out of their workers because they're investing in technology and productivity is growing. That's really unique at this late stage of an expansion.
Well, you said late stage of an expansion. Are there limits, or if we're writing new rules, can the expansion continue for a couple more years?
Well, we're going to see. I've been saying it can't go on for much longer for some time, and yet it has continued to increase. We're now in the longest stretch of consecutive job gains on record. We've been seeing more jobs in our economy, more people working since 2010. Let's hope that continues.
So wages are rising, aren't they?
Wages are rising. They grew 3.2% from last year. That's with consumer price index of 1.9%. So those are real wage gains. When you see real wage gains, then that makes an impact on the economy. It means people can buy more stuff, that there's growth that's still available in the economy.
We have some directors on the HR committee and on the finance committee listening in today. They're interested in productivity. Is labor productivity advancing? And if it is, what's that mean?
It is advancing. It was up 3.6% in the last 3 months. That was the best gain since 2010. And in fact, what normally happens is you see productivity gains at the beginning of a period of expansion. It's very rare to see them at the back end of a period of expansion. And what it means, I think, is we're in an era as we all know and feel, of extraordinary technological development. That is allowing companies, if they're pressured on wages, if they want to increase capacity, to invest in new technologies that are really changing the output, what they can produce in ways that are unprecedented.
John, you make a great point about the relationship between productivity and technology. Could you expand upon that a little bit?
Well, we are in an era where the technology that we're seeing is like we've never seen. It's like in the beginning of the industrial era when new machines were coming in to the economy and changing things exponentially. So today, employers at any time can make the decision to pour technology in when they can't find the workers they need. You could put kiosks in McDonald's and allow people to self-serve, or in retail stores. You can add new systems like Uber to give your transportation kinds of needs where you can't find any truckers, an instant lift. So today, companies can invest heavily in technology when they can't find the skilled workers they need. And that seems to be the reason why wages are staying low. Companies have other options. They can keep on pouring new technology in that in some ways takes away or depletes their need for new workers.
And is that investment in technology a smarter play for institutions at the end of the expansion, more so than capital projects?
Exactly. The investment in new technologies, in ways to make your workflow more efficient, in technology that sets up how you'll work and the business will operate in the future. Why not put that capital to long-term use rather than just building new facilities?
Let me pause and talk about an issue that you raised when you were here with us last fall, the gig economy. I've heard different things as to whether or not millennials are maintaining in the gig workforce or they are leaving that for more stable employment. What are you seeing?
Well, I'm really of two minds here. I do think long-term we're going to continue to see more gig employment, more people who work remotely. You don't have to be, for example, in a big city. Maybe that's the long-term answer to some of the unemployment woes in our smaller towns and rural areas. We see that people like the life-work balance that gig kind of employment gives them. Employers like the fact that they can utilize people with specialized skills when they need them and not when they don't need them. At the same time, as people get further in their lives, the millennials of today, everybody wants more stability. You need it when you have a family. So there's going to be increased demand or pressure from workers, the millennials, as they move later into their working lives to have more stable jobs.
How does that play out in the relationship with the job market?
Well, it means that that people can take on jobs, second jobs, third jobs on the side. It means they can audition in some ways for other types of jobs as a contractor, a gig worker first. It means more people are self-employed and really manage their work and personal life balances in new ways. So it's changing the contract between employers and workers.
Let's go back to the unemployment issue. I understand the U6 rate's been lower. What does that mean?
Well, the U6 rate is not just people who are looking for work and they've looked in the last month. That's when you hear the headline number of 3.6% unemployment. That's the only people they're counting. But U6 adds in other workers, people who've looked in the last year, people who are in part-time jobs who would prefer full-time ones, and adds them to the rate. That U6 number is not as low as it's been before, and it does suggest there's more room in this economy, in this expansion, for the growth to continue.
What does that mean for the HR department of a hospital or a health system looking to kind of plan for its workforce needs over the next year?
Well, most healthcare recruiters and HR people are finding that it's very difficult to find talent. Most people are working in an unemployment time where, even with that U6 rate we just talked about, we're in the lowest unemployment rate time in any of our working lifetimes since the 60s. So it's very hard to find people, especially skilled workers. One of the big areas of improvement has been that low-skilled workers have been seeing more unemployment. That's a very positive thing for our society and our economy. But for healthcare, HR recruiters looking for talent, often you have to pull them away from other healthcare systems. People don't stay on the unemployment lines for very long. So it is a war for talent out there.
So you really see a lot of lateral activity, lateral movement in a city, major metropolitan area with 4 or 5 health systems?
Well, you can see that. People are more open to moving. There's less of a sense from, and rightfully so, from workers today that they are going to stay at any one organization all their lives. That means that they're more willing to move also when the times are in their favor, right? When unemployment's very high, healthcare systems and all employers today are much more willing to let people go. Well, this is a time where the tables have turned, so people are more open to moving. But again, that leads to instability. It leads to, for that individual moving, am I going to fit in this new organization, fit with the people, be able to succeed in the work? So people don't want to move. Healthcare companies, of course, are working hard to retain their best people. So people move, but it's also, it's a battle to hold on to your very best people, the ones you want to stay, who know your organization, have memory, knowledge that about your organization that makes them more valuable than a new hire with the same skills.
Let's pivot for a moment to our regular short segment, What's Trending Now?, when we try to flag a new governance issue we see on the horizon. And for me today, it's the call for directors to renew their commitment to full engagement with high-profile agenda items. This arises in part from several highly public controversies in other industry sectors involving matters of product and public safety and consumer rights. In these situations, national media coverage is now focusing on the board's role, with particular concentration on its decision-making process, in meeting director engagement, and reliance on executives. In these instances, we're dealing with natural media interest and inference. Yet the suggestion is clear. In times of corporate controversy, boardroom conduct is increasingly under the microscope. So there's value in directors sharpening their game a bit when it comes to the extent of their attentiveness and inquisitiveness, especially in board meetings. And now let's turn back to our conversation with John Challenger of Challenger Gray and Christmas, where we're discussing with John the importance of board oversight of economic trends and jobs data. There's been lots of discussion, John, in the papers of late about the decreasing tenure of CEOs, both as it relates to compensation and as it relates to the work of the Executive Search and Succession Committee. Is this a blip, or are we seeing a situation where the expectation is CEOs will have a limited term, shorter than it's been in the past?
Well, CEO tenure continues to go down, certainly from what it was a generation ago. We're seeing average tenure in the latest CEO report we did of about 9 years. In that latest report, we found that 26 CEOs had stepped down in the healthcare industry. That's about a third less than we saw last year. But in regard to tenure, I often think that as a CEO, you should think about maybe getting one term in office. And if you're lucky, you get a second term. And so average tenure, often we're seeing it run in that 6 to 7 year period over the entire industry.
And what do you attribute that 1 or 2 term limit to be? Is that more just simply a reflection on the volatility of the economy or the volatility of a particular industry?
Well, I think that shareholders, stakeholders, boards that represent them just have less patience. The mistakes that CEOs make or that companies at the top make are much more transparent and visible. There's just less room for those mistakes to be swept under the rug, and they pile up. So for most CEOs, they know that with each year, there are going to be people who feel that some of the mistakes are their fault. They sit on top. They're often the scapegoat. It's a way of signaling to shareholders and other stakeholders that you're taking action at the top when things aren't going right. So especially in down times or when you're not competing as well as your competition, there's a lot of pressure on those CEOs.
And then is there a concomitant impact on CEO compensation?
Well, interestingly, when organizations let their CEO go, they put searches out. They want the very best people. Well, those very best people who are succeeding, in their jobs at peak potential are being paid well. So there's a lot of upward pressure on CEO pay, even as shareholders and others have tried to even use the bully pulpit to push those salaries down. It doesn't seem to happen. So they seem to keep going up.
John, your firm does an extraordinary job in analyzing all the hiring data, the succession data, some of the economy. What else are you seeing out there that's important and significant from your perspective?
Well, I think the real question that boards and others face is just how long will this expansion go? It's gone further than most anybody would have expected. How deep will the recession be when that happens? Are we borrowing with tax cuts and high spending? Are we borrowing into the recession, making it worse? Time will tell. I still think it argues for caution on the part of leaders. Big long-term projects, there may be the money out there to put those projects on, but it's a risky time.
Well, John, lots of CEOs like to be able to show to their constituents bricks being laid, new holes being dug for new facilities, expanded facilities. And in the healthcare sector, we see this enormous transition to outpatient facilities. So capital commitments are critical. And you're saying we should be careful, though, in terms of how much we invest, because we could be borrowing against a future recession.
Well, that's my sense of it. Everybody seems to build the most in the last years of an expansion. Again, money is flowing freely. There's always sometimes unfettered optimism about the future, but smart leaders recognize that it's actually in the earlier periods of an expansion where capturing the growth potential and not putting too much debt on the books is the time to make those kinds of decisions.
John, any other thoughts before we break up for the Finance Committee members listening to you today?
Well, it is interesting also what you brought up. I mean, we're also moving quickly into an era where investing in real estate is a real question mark. So many more people can work from home, from remote facilities. Might see fewer of those big building plans in the center of cities and more building of smaller, much more spread out kinds of facilities to be closer to where consumers or the business is.
And any final tips for the folks on the Executive Succession Committee who are listening to you today?
Well, it's time to fight for your workers, to retain them, your very best people, identifying your highest potentials, identifying who the people are that shoulder the load in every area of your company, and looking for ways to retain them is crucial. You can know that they're being sought out and their candidacies are so much more transparent today. Other companies want to hire them, so holding on tight to them is crucial.
John Challenger, President and CEO of Challenger, Gray & Christmas, thanks as always for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
John Challenger has, as always, given us substantial food for thought today, not only with respect to the Finance Committee and its monitoring of the economy, but also with respect to the HR, governance, and executive comp and succession committees and their responsibilities. There's great value in teeing up some of these economic issues John talked about for these committees. Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode of Governing Health. Be sure to subscribe to the full complimentary podcast series. You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube. There you'll be able to stay up to date with all our future episodes and to re-listen to the old ones. Until then, I'm your host, Michael Peregrine, saying thanks so much for listening.
This material is for general information purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice or any other advice on any specific facts or circumstances. No one should act or refrain from acting based upon any information herein without seeking professional legal advice. McDermott, Will & Emery makes no warranties, representations, or claims of any kind concerning the content herein. McDermott and the contributing presenters or authors expressly disclaim all liability to any person in respect of the consequences of anything done or not done in reliance upon the use of contents included herein. Copyright 2019, McDermott, Will & Emery, all rights reserved. Any use of these materials, including reproduction, modification, distribution, or republication without the prior written consent of McDermott is strictly prohibited. This may be considered attorney advertising. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome.